The people of Israel were called to be representatives of God. That's why they have so many commands. Everything that they're commanded to do is to help them be representatives of God in the world among the other nations. Their king had very specific rules as well. The king of Israel wasn't supposed to look like or behave like all of the other kings. He had a very specific job description, and it wasn't like that of other kings. Saul is the first king of Israel, and he starts off okay, but he starts to slip. There's this part in 1 Samuel chapter 13 where Saul, who's a really great military leader, has led the Israelites in a series of skirmishes, little battles with the Philistines. There comes a point where the Philistines gather all their guys together in order to prepare for battle, and the Israelites get scared at the numbers of the forces. So they start to hide. Saul, who again is a great military leader, gathers everyone together in preparation for battle. Now, it was customary that they would have a sacrifice offered before they go into battle. This is kind of hard for us to understand, but even the way they do war was supposed to be representative of God. And so they're waiting. He's gathered his guys together, and they're waiting to go into battle. They wait for 7 days because it has to be a priest who offers the sacrifice. So they're waiting for Samuel to come. They wait for 7 days, and he hasn't shown up yet. Saul's guys are starting to run off, and so he decides to offer the sacrifice himself. And so he does. And right after he does it, the very moment Saul finished offering up the entirely burned offering, Samuel arrived. Saul went out to meet him and welcome him, but Samuel said, "What have you done?" "I saw that my troops were deserting," Saul replied. "You hadn't arrived by the appointed time, and the Philistines were marching at Michmash. I thought, the Philistines are about to march against me at Gilgal, and I haven't yet sought favor from the Lord. So I took control of myself and offered the entirely burned offering." "How stupid of you to have broken the commands the Lord your God gave you," Samuel told Saul. "The Lord would have established your rule over Israel forever, but now your rule won't last. The Lord will search for a man following the Lord's own heart, and the Lord will commission him as a leader over God's people because you didn't keep the Lord's command." Saul didn't follow his job description as a king who was representing God. He decided to take matters into his own hands, to do it his way, maybe to do it the way that the other kings would have done it, and he decided that that trumped the commands that the Lord had given him. As such, he loses his entire dynasty. It means that his sons are no longer going to be kings of Israel. Instead, we see later that David becomes the king. Unfortunately, Saul does a really similar thing not long after. In chapter 15, he's called to go into battle against the Amalekites, and God actually commands him to completely wipe them out, all of their people, all of their animals. Again, something that's kind of hard for us to grapple with. But when he goes into battle, he does it, except he doesn't kill their king, and he keeps all of the best animals. Again, Samuel has to come to him and scold him and reprimand him. But Saul says, "What? We just wanted to keep these animals for sacrifices." Whether he really meant that or not is beside the point. That's not what God had commanded him to do. He wasn't doing his job in a way that was properly representing the Lord and what the Lord's wishes were. As followers of Christ, we have the same role as the people of Israel had. We are supposed to be representing Christ in everything that we do. That means that it actually doesn't matter what our job is. Our real job is to be representatives of Christ, to be different in the world. Even the bottom line of whatever our work, our job is, could potentially change when it's put into the context of kingdom work. In the book of Ephesians, Paul is addressing the church in Ephesus, and there's a part where he's specifically speaking to slaves and their masters. This makes us a little bit uncomfortable because we really want Paul to say how bad slavery is, but the fact of the matter is that in the Greco-Roman world, slavery was just a part of the way that they did life. And so without going into whether or not slavery is right or wrong, he's saying in this reality where some people have one role and some people have another, this is the way that you should behave. And so in Ephesians chapter 6, it says, And for slaves, obey your masters with fear and trembling and with sincere devotion to Christ. Don't work to make yourself look good and try to flatter people, but act like slaves of Christ, carrying out God's will from the heart. Serve your owners enthusiastically as though you were serving the Lord and not human beings. You know that the Lord will reward every person who does what is right, whether that person is a slave or a free person. As for masters, treat your slaves in the same way. Stop threatening them, because you know that both you and your slaves have a master in heaven. He doesn't distinguish between people on the basis of status. It doesn't matter that Saul was a king and there were peasants. Both were supposed to be representatives of God. Maybe their jobs, their roles within the world were sort of different, but both are supposed to represent God in everything that we do. The same is true for slaves and their masters, and the same is true for us today. It means that it really doesn't matter what your job is. It doesn't matter if you are the CEO of a company or a stay-at-home parent, or whether you're retired or recently laid off and searching for a job. None of those things matter. What matters is that your bottom line in all of them, no matter what, is to be a representative of God, of Christ, to be kingdom workers right now in whatever it is that we're doing. And so, like Paul says in the book of Colossians, he says, whatever you do it from the heart for the Lord and not for people. You know that you will receive an inheritance as a reward. You serve the Lord Christ.